Welcome to the GSX podcast, where we explore the evolving landscape of commodities, trading, and alternative capital. Hosted by me, Henry Walsh, and the team at Great Southern Cross Commodities, the podcast brings together market participants, managers, and investors to discuss how capital, policy, and innovation are reshaping the global commodity markets. From carbon to coffee, energy to macro, we cover the full commodity investment universe, unpacking the trends, risks, and opportunities that matter. Please note, the views and opinions expressed on the GSX podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Great Southern Cross Commodities or its affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as financial, investment, or trading advice. Listeners should conduct their own research or consult a professional advisor before making any financial decisions. Welcome to the GSX podcast. Today we have an extra special guest, a friend of mine, Susan Stroud from St. Louis in Missouri. Susan runs her own consulting and advisory firm, Noble Ag. We were introduced by some mutual friends, and it's been great over the last 5 or 6 years to see her grow her business from a small subscription business to a much bigger subscription business with events and conferences, and she's all over the Bloomberg and other news wires these days, so very impressive. So welcome aboard, Susan.
Thanks for that intro. It's very nice.
I guess would like to start, pre-Noble Ag. What got you into the industry to begin with, and then what drove you to try and start your own business during COVID?
It was kind of a slow progression. So my first job out of college internship, was with a regional feed mill grain elevator in southeastern Missouri. So I started working there, and then I kind of took a liking to the grain side of things, not so much all the other things that come along with a country elevator. So I started working for ADM in St. Louis at one of their river facilities. That would have been back in 2008 or so, I believe. I worked there for about 7 years. So mainly I was just was responsible for producer customers. So we're taking bushels in by truck and also rail, and then loading out on barge on the Mississippi River in St. Louis. So I was there for 7 years, and then I took another opportunity at a competing grain elevator, owned by Consolidated Grain and Barge. Their parent companies are Zeno and Itochu, which are two large Japanese trading houses. So I worked for CGB for 5 years. I really did the same type of work when I was there with them, focusing on producers, helping them make better risk management decisions. But it kind of morphed my time there. They were pretty good about really not holding me back at all. And so when I said, okay, I'm putting more effort into my writing, it really started out with email updates for my producers there. But as time went along, I really pushed myself to be writing about the things that were not just kind of explaining what's already happened in the market, but then also having a little bit of foresight too. So we got to the point where the last year of my career with them, I was sending out a once a week email update. It was called Straight Talk with Susan. And it went to not only all CGB and Zeno employees, but it also went to the entire customer base too. So that was kind of the first real big push into writing. The elevator business it's frustrating. And especially being along the river, it can be really challenging at times. It's a very competitive market. I'd say that in the St. Louis market, it's probably the most competitive and cutthroat market of any markets in the U.S. as far as grain goes. Reason being because along the Mississippi, St. Louis is as far north as you can get in the inland waterway system before you hit a lock and dam. So it means that barge traffic flows uninterrupted in theory from St. Louis all the way to the Gulf, or the Gulf all the way north until you get to St. Louis. So it has a distinct freight advantage. So that also gives it and it's a time advantage too, because you're not considering those slowdowns as you go through locks. So it's a very high volume. It's the largest volume market in the United States. And a lot of those bushels, they're coming in by truck or by rail, and they're all being directed towards the Gulf for export. So I think that a lot of, working in that environment for most of my professional career, that really helped kind of set the stage for me and get me ready, I guess, for the next thing.
For context, how many bushels of grain go through there every year, or tons?
Oh
Tons
gosh.
of it. Any idea?
You're going to ask me that question, and I guess I could go type it in something really quickly. Generally, I would say that it's at least 10% of any corn export, bean export has probably gone or originated in the St. Louis market to start with.
That's a huge
And
number.
those
Yeah.
things are always, those things are always changing too. But
Yeah.
the point is for instance, like this year, when you have a big crop, what's the way that it doesn't matter what country it is, you get rid of your excess generally by exporting. You have a lot of bushels, they become inexpensive, and you're shipping them somewhere. And a lot of times when you can see where you get these large freight disparities or something like that too, and it's crazy how you can end up with bushels that work one way that it doesn't really, maybe it doesn't make sense. But the St. Louis market, they've been pulling this past year beans from the Dakotas or Iowa or, almost into Canada, that kind of thing.
Wow.
You can pull via rail and have transloaded onto barge into St. Louis. A lot of that happening too, especially as we see the U.S. soy meal export program grow. A lot of that is moving by rail too into St. Louis and then transloaded on barge. So it was a really good, it's a good place and a good environment, I guess, for me to pick up a pretty sound understanding of logistics, especially the river. And really that's what, fast forward a few years later, I left CGB in, I think it was August or September of 2020. It wasn't for 2 years. It took me 2 years before I turned No Bull into kind of what it is now, a paid subscription service. But the reason that I really pushed it, the only reason that our mutual friend pushed me into saying this is where you have to start charging for it, was when we had the first major issue with low water on the Mississippi in the fall of 2022. And
Yeah.
that's something that, even today, here we are, 3 harvests, we're going into 4 years of low water conditions on the Mississippi, or lower water conditions. So yeah, it's funny how things kind of go full circle, but that was really one of the things that got me into writing, is understanding that there's kind of a gap. People like visuals. They like it when you take complicated things and you kind of you're able to explain it to them like they're in middle school or grade school. It doesn't matter what your career or your position is today. If you need to be quickly informed about something accurately and maybe actually enjoy reading it, then that's where I feel like my gift is, or maybe makes me a little different from most broker wires.
Yeah, certainly. Just stepping back a bit. So when all those companies that are bidding for grain at that point, other than price, what's their point of differentiation? I mean, there's not a lot, right? It's all,
Yeah, so that was really one of the things that was, honestly, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that in a discussion like this. So this is good, because it's really one of the things that kind of pushed me out of the physical grain business finally. It's very difficult to be number one, because you're at an elevator, you can't have it all. I mean, maybe you can be a brand new build and you can be fantastic, but what happens with that? Maybe you outbuy your capacity, which that's what some facilities deal with. Or in the case, you're limited by how your facility is set up. So for instance, the ADM facility that I worked at, they had 2 facilities that we bought for. One, because how St. Louis is, the river is right down the middle between the Missouri side, the west side, and then what you would call the east side, which is St. Louis. That's in Illinois. On that side of the river, it's for the most part, it's really run down. There's not much there. The Missouri side of the river is the only part of town where there's really much to speak of, but each side creates its own challenges. So if you're a farmer that lives in Missouri, well, if you don't have the proper licensing on your trucks and things, you can't cross the river, you can't cross state lines. So, you're limited. Or maybe the facility that I worked at for a long time on the Illinois side, it was challenging because they didn't have storage. You get a new, if you're waiting on a barge, then you might have a truck line that's 5 hours long. Or, each place has, they have the pros and cons of all of that, and it gets a little, it's so to get back to your point or your question, yeah, you can have loyalty, you can have a merchandiser that's really good and does all of the right things for you and they help you make better decisions. But if you are a merchandiser that works at a facility that constantly has breakdowns, or you constantly have a longer line, or they don't agree with the grades, or any number of things. You get into the winter months where you have low water and then you have ice and then you have all of these other things that can make life really challenging. So it doesn't matter what business you're in. You always want what's best for your customer. And sometimes the thing that stings the worst is when you know what your customer needs, it's something that you can't necessarily offer. So that was, for me, the biggest challenge with working in an elevator type environment.
And in terms of the landscape there, so you've got, say, if you're ADM, like how are you direct to the farmer? Are you going through regional elevators? Are you going through regional merchandisers or brokers? Like, how does it work in terms of...
Sure. It depends on the location, and some of these things maybe have changed a bit since I've been there, but you could have, for instance, like Cargill. In a lot of cases, they operate out of more of a regional type office, and so they wouldn't even necessarily have a merchandiser that's there at the facility that you're speaking to. A lot of the facilities in St. Louis, because it is such a high volume market, it is very commercial. So you have a lot of, it used to be years ago that it was more like 80% commercial and 20% truck traffic. I think that that's moderated some over the course of the past 10 years, especially. Bigger crops, farmers, you get bigger equipment, you start realizing that maybe you don't want to give your local elevator a little share. You're just going to drive it straight to the river market yourself, that kind of thing.
Okay. And have the farmers generally got bigger in terms of land holdings, either through consolidation or corporate farms or...
Yeah, definitely on the consolidation side of things. Central Illinois is a very unique market. It's an interesting market, that market that's they have the choice of feeding into the St. Louis River market, or they can go to like Decatur, Illinois, where you have ADM processing. You also have, it used to be Tate & Lyle, I think it's Primient now. So you have several different options. But for that reason, that it's such a high volume market as far as the demands of grain, you also see very high rents, and you have a lot of very large farmers, or in some cases you have, your corporate landowners of sorts, or you have these guys that own lots and lots of acres that they're looking to partner with a very large producer. So you see a lot of that stuff, but definitely size is getting larger.
Yeah. So fast forward to No Bull, in terms of when you started writing and then subscribers, I mean, who is your initial target client, and has that changed over the last few years?
Yeah, definitely. The target client initially I was always writing very farmer centric, farmer focused. I would say the past few years though, over the course of the past year especially, And as I've pushed more into biofuels and then some of these more complicated policy type matters, I'm starting to see that, in general, producers have a lot of free information at their fingertips. Not saying it's necessarily the best information, but they have a lot of information thrown at them. So it's generally not the farmer type way to lean really heavy into some sort of paid subscription service. I still have plenty of farmer clients, but really the bigger the growth and the area that I see the most interest, it's grain companies or processors or brokers, institutional investors or hedge funds or something like that. So seeing a lot of kind of, for me, non-traditional influx of subscribers as I've moved, I think, more from that producer type focus to more of a bigger picture. I don't want to say commercial, but it's definitely been a shift.
Yeah, you can see that with your writing, to be honest. So I think what it differentiates your product from broker wires that I used to read a long time ago is you aren't really trying to push a view one way or the other, and you're more trying to look at, this is the setup, this is the risks in either direction. And I guess, for institutional and hedge fund clients who are just trying to stay across a certain sector, I think they find it very valuable, because then they can do their own DD if they think there's something interesting going on, but they don't have to be on top of every piece of minutia, which is different. If you're trading physical grains in the region every single day, then you're going to be on top of the minutia, right? But if you're a hedge fund in London, you're not going to be. So I think that's where that use case is very good, and hence I guess the change in your clients.
Yeah, and I feel like I run into a lot of people that they might be bothered by the fact that I don't give, or they don't understand why I do not give trade recommendations. And for me, really, it's kind of, as you just said, I feel like it's better to put the information out there. I mean, I can always be writing with some, a little bit of bias or kind of skew to the writing, but I'm never going to just come out and say that, okay, this is a really good buy here or whatnot. But I do think that if I would have a physical position on, I also think that impacts my ability to write about it, because as soon as you have a position on the books, then it's, you don't realize it, but there's some sort of unconscious bias to the way that you present things. So I've always liked to take the very educational approach, right or wrong, but that's how I prefer to write. And until I see reason to do otherwise, I think I'm going to stick with this method.
No, I think it's a good one. And in terms of your other revenue streams, you've got conferences and tours and things like that. How did that come about?
For me, the conference thing, it's kind of like how we've had this working friendship relationship for several years now. And, you think about it, sometimes it's one conversation that can just, something that comes out of the blue that can change the trajectory of where you're going. And for me, that happened a handful of years ago. I met someone at a conference event, and one conversation turned into another connection or two, and it opened up this whole new, literally, world of close contacts that I have now, and it really changed the way that I look at my business and the way that I look at potential growth going forward. So it started with, I wanted to do a conference for a long time, because I've been to a million industry conferences, and they go one of two ways. Most of them, you're at a hyper focused event that's on some, let's say it's ethanol, or it's on some very, very specific thing. You're with these people that you see at every other event. You're not really necessarily gaining anything. I mean, you're having some late nights, but I'm not sure that you really walk away having conversations that have real value or making new connections. So in 23 was the first year that I decided to do it. And now looking back, I think I'm crazy for even attempting it. But instead of a hotel ballroom, I rented out this entire massive multi-story open bar entertainment venue that's adjacent to Busch Stadium where the Cardinals play.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a very different, from the beginning, I'm like, okay, I want this to be a very different experience, a conference experience that people actually enjoy. But I want it to be something where you're there making these new friends and you're surrounded with people who, you always want to be. I never want to be the smartest person in the room. I always want to surround myself. It's kind of like our trader chat that we have. I don't know half of what you're talking about half the time, but you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, or they know things that are outside of your general realm. And I really feel like that's the way that this is how you advance and you make yourself grow. And so I designed the conference event with that in mind, and it's turned out to be a great thing. So AgriNext this year, I'm partnering with Bloomberg, so it's Bloomberg Intelligence, their team. They're helping me moderate and present. So that's a big deal and really exciting to be able to bring their name into the mix this year.
Yeah, it's impressive. Yeah.
So, but the focus on the event every year, it's just been very forward thinking, and that's why I eventually came up with the name AgriNext. It's kind of like, okay, well, for instance, in this one, this year we're doing a focus on protein. So the changing world protein consumption habits, and then also how that's impacting protein meal demand. We're able to have all of this incredible soybean meal demand and canola meal, and that's really the biggest driver behind it. And we're also going to be talking about fertilizer, and then obviously feedstocks, biofuels, kind of where we're headed with the next group of global mandates, that sort of thing. So pretty excited about this year's event.
It looks awesome. Unfortunately, I can't get there. A long way from Australia. That brings us to biofuels, renewable fuels, the changes that sort of happened in Biden's term in terms of policy that really got especially the soybean oil market excited. A lot of infrastructure build out in the States. Wind the clock forward to today. Under Trump too, you've had some uncertainty around policy, but it seems to be sort of stabilizing now. I guess as far as anything is stable under Donald. And so, how's the sector looking now? And you've already alluded to it. I think one of the biggest impacts, aside from indirect impacts, was just the amount of meal that's being produced in the States now and the export program that's created. And I guess similar for Canada with canola meal. Do you want to sort of give an update of sort of where things, the lay of the land today, and how you think things might go forward, not necessarily in price terms, but just industry terms?
Yeah, it's been a very challenging past, we'll just say, year and a half, because in 2025 we had major changes to the way that we incentivized biomass-based diesel production here in the U.S. And then again, we have major changes effective January 1 this year with 45Z amendments taking effect. So, and then add in the fact that we had the RVO for 2026 and 27 finally released in late March of this year. So the biggest changes for soybean oil and then canola oil is really where I'll focus most of this on, because with the 45Z changes, one, it removed indirect land use change penalties. So that put crop-based biofuels on a more even playing field with those that are made from a waste product like UCO or tallow. So that was one huge change, because it doubled to tripled the credit that you could receive, the production credit for fuels made from soybean oil. For canola oil, it finally got canola oil on the board. Previously, its carbon intensity was too high to qualify. The other big change is that it's USMCA only, so you have to source those feedstocks for 45Z from North America. This is also where a lot of the support is coming for soybean oil and canola oil. The other huge change was with the RVO finally taking effect. So EPA, they decided to delay their proposed RIN haircut for any fuels that were made from an imported feedstock. But the way that they made up for that was by requiring a record large amount of RIN generation as part of the 26 and 27 mandate. And so the way that it works out and the way that EPA sees it working out, they see that U.S. soybean oil demand will, for biofuels, is going to increase substantially. But they also, it's almost like they backed into their math by using canola oil as a marginal feedstock to help kind of pick up what's lost with this larger mandate. So they see declines in those imported feedstock categories, and then they're seeing tremendous amount of gains for feedstock demand in canola and soybean oil.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because until that point, a lot of the feedstocks that were coming in were imported Chinese UCO, right? Is that correct? And tallow from elsewhere.
Yeah, so imported used cooking oil has been banned from 45Z entirely. So no credits at all, and so that's changed things. Plus the way that China had changed some of their export protocols on UCO. So we've seen the China UCO flows nearly cut off, except I think we've seen some come back a little bit into Gulf Coast facilities that are possibly producing SAF. So the other one, for instance, that was a big one for us was Brazilian tallow, beef tallow imports. But since Brazil won, we put a huge tariff on them. Let's see, right at the beginning, I think, of the fourth quarter last year. Yeah. And then we have the uncertainty with that, and then also now with Brazilian tallow excluded from 45Z, we've seen major changes in import flows. So I think some of these things, especially with RIN values, moving substantially higher, and we have all these other pieces, it's like the market is just now coming to realize, wait a second, this is a really big RVO. How are we going to get there? Especially because we've started out 2026 way behind the 8 ball. So, it's just, I don't know. It's been a mess of the past several months.
Yeah. Where does all the Brazilian beef tallow gone since it's not coming to the States? Is it staying domestically, or is it gone to China?
Unless they're potentially using more of it themselves domestically, because I know they went to a 15, and I was thinking that they had a B16 on the way maybe, but I think that I'm not sure that one has been. I think that one is still up in the air.
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of what's the impact regionally of these build-outs? Like, has it created a lot of employment regionally, these new plants, etc., or is it hasn't really made a difference to the regional economies, or how's that been sort of the broader impact of these policies?
Well, I think that one thing, you have to kind of take into consideration is where these plants are built. So for instance, there's a Schooler plant, I think it's Schooler, that's in Goodland, Kansas. It's not a heavily populated area with a lot of people that are available for, to work. And so I know in this case, like, they're busing people in. So, in a lot of these cases, you're putting up new plants that are in the middle of a rural area, and so you have some challenges, I think, with that. Right now, let me tell you where we are right now. So yeah, right now we're about 2/3 of the way through the total build out, and I think that there's been a lot of talk with, will this add to more U.S. crush capacity? I'm confident that that's being kicked around, but the thing that you have to remember is that we're talking about legislation like 45Z. I believe it goes through the end of 2029, but for the RVO right now, we have it for calendar year 2026 and 27. So we're going to make it about 18. We won't even make it that far down the road before we're going to start talking about the next set of rules, which so 2028 is the next calendar year where we have to make decisions. That's not very far away.
No, in terms of making investment decisions, it's pretty tough, right?
Yeah, it's effectively impossible. I know that there are a few other plants here in the US that have been kind of questionable so far, and maybe this is what helps put them over the edge, but I haven't seen anything that would indicate that, because think about it, crush numbers are, we have board crush at record high, $3.50 or whatever it is per bushel. New crop crush is record high by a mile as well. Mm-hmm. That's fine, but that's today's value, and that strength is coming from biofuel policy, and thankfully we've been able to figure out so far how to get rid of the meal.
Yeah. Describe that in a bit more detail. Where is the meal going? Both the canola meal out of Canada and the soybean meal out of the States. Is it going to new markets, I guess?
Yeah, well, so with anything livestock, you have to keep in mind least cost formulation. So especially for something like poultry and swine, where if you back up and just speaking of U.S. soybean meal, 2/3 of domestic soybean meal demand goes to something with a feather. Half of all domestic soybean meal demand is to broiler chickens for meat. So that's the most important thing. And in fact, broiler chickens eat more meal themselves than what we export total.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So if you take a step back and you look at overall world protein demand and growth, where we're getting the most growth from is chicken by a mile. So chicken is something that's very meal dependent, and it, again, in least cost formulations, when you have cheaper soybean meal, it just manages to squeeze out some of those synthetic amino acids that normally you would be using more of in a ration to balance the diet.
Okay. And that's the same with canola meal?
Canola is a little different. I mean, I know that canola is used more heavily in dairy applications, but yeah, the same thing in general applies. For us here in the US, you have to consider that we import about 80 of our total canola oil supplies are imported from Canada. So when you consider, the US is not a massive crusher, we're not a massive grower of canola, so that's imported, and it's US biofuel policy. That's one of the reasons that Canada is expanding their crush as well.
Yeah, the reason I ask is here in Australia, if biofuels/renewable fuels are to ever get any legs, it's going to have to be from canola oil, but we don't really have the crushing capacity here, so we're in this perpetual loop of waiting for government policy.
Waiting for something, yeah.
But we import quite a lot of soybean meal for, various animal feed, and so you are going to have a home for some of it. And I guess the markets are pretty efficient for finding homes for new product and creating new trade flows. So I'm not concerned about it. The main problem we have here is aside from our government, but the policies are generally more aligned with European carbon intensity rules versus what you've alluded to earlier with the changes. So, but I think the wake-up call of the Strait of Hormuz and Russia a few years ago in terms of fuel availability, maybe we'll finally get some policy certainty here. But it'll be interesting because here the US fuel policy has had a lot of impact on trade flows out of here. So generally the tallow would stay domestically or get exported to the US for feed use or food use, human consumption or other things, and it's been going to California for inputs there. So you've been importing more palm oil down here for local use, or sunflower oil or some domestic crush, and the domestic crush is growing here, but from a relatively small base. So, but it's just interesting seeing potentially what can change here given what's happened in the States.
The interesting thing about not only the combination of policy changes in the US. So we put a tariff on something, or what biofuel policy, policy dictates winners and losers. So you have these price differentials that develop these, we would call it as a trader an arbitrage opportunity, but you get these things where one market moves one way. It's kind of like if you look at US soybean oil, it's hundreds of dollars per metric ton more expensive than the next closest alternative because it's on this high priced island trying to meet this record amount of demand. But eventually, rising tide lifts all boats. So, Australian tallow can start to rally. Brazilian tallow can rally, even though both of those items wouldn't see a credit under 45Z. We should still see them flowing into some, you'll see them flowing into some sort of market where someone will make them into a renewable fuel. It's just going to depend on where are the incentives, what's their landed cost versus other things. And then obviously the mess in the Middle East has just created even more oddities. But how you had mentioned, we were able to find a home for things. I think one of the more interesting aspects that's overlooked of the whole US and Brazil too, soy crush capacity expansion, because Brazil is building out just as much as the US. We talk about it, I feel like, a lot more here in the US, and that driver is really because of biofuel policy. But when you look back at the growth rate because of the expansion and crush in the US and Brazil, we are effectively running crush margins for everyone else into the ground. So you're seeing a lot of these countries that traditionally would be importing whole beans to crush themselves. We're seeing a rotation out of that, and it's been happening the past 5 years or so. So we're starting to see more meal imports from countries that used to import whole soybeans, but it's just cheaper for them to buy the meal versus buy the bean and then crush it.
So what's happened to their domestic crushing capacity then? Is it in decline? Or like their facilities?
It's just, you're not seeing max crush like you are in the US and Brazil. But remember, the US and Brazil, although at the end of the day, soybeans are a protein meal crop, it's 80% meal or whatever by volume. We're crushing beans for oil in both of those countries.
Yeah. And how does Argentina fit into all this? Because they're one of the countries that used to import a lot of beans to crush as well. And obviously they're making some changes to their tax policy and a few other things there. I mean, how have you seen, I guess, the combination of changes in domestic policy within Argentina under the change of government, plus, what you've just spoken about with the US and Brazil? What's the sort of the outlook for Argentina and their crush capacity in their soybean industry?
Yeah, Argentina has been just another mess. One more thing that it's constantly like, okay, wow, what are they doing today to screw things up? So they've been on the path with the current administration. They've been on the path of the Javier Milei promised, and that was to reduce these export taxes and lift agriculture up. And so the latest announcement is another new permanent tax cut. It's actually a little more complicated than what it appeared like on the surface for not only soybeans, but soy products too. It's this gradual decrease over time. So at the end of the day, it means that in theory, the price paid at the Argentine farm level is better than what it had been previously. It encourages more bushels to flow. It also, it will ultimately makes Argentina more competitive on the export market. Okay. It's not anything like what we were hit with back in, was it September maybe, where suddenly overnight it was, okay, we have this period of time where there are no export taxes at all, and Argentina effectively flooded the market with bushels there for a little bit, and then everyone calmed down, the sky wasn't falling. But yeah, it's not a bullish thing. I'm not saying that it's immediately bearish, but longer term, it leaves them to be more competitive on the world
Fair
stage.
enough.
And kind of getting, Argentina for a long time, they've always had tax policies where they favored the soy products had a better tax rate than soybeans themselves. And the design behind that, or the intention, was that it would encourage them to crush domestically and then export a higher value product. And to get back to your original point, yes, Argentina imports a substantial amount of their beans every year from Paraguay. It's a logistic thing. Plus,
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident that the beans from Paraguay have maybe it's a higher protein content too. It helps lift the protein of their meal.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated than just they're importing from Paraguay. I don't know. I'm excited. Ag Ventures, my the travel portion of my business, we're going to spend 10 days in Argentina, the first part of March of 27. So working on that itinerary now, but I'm excited. I've never been to Argentina, so I'm pretty excited to check it out firsthand.
Awesome. And how does that work? Who are you targeting there, both on who comes with you and who you go and visit? How does that work?
So with this one, we're trying to push for the first half of March, just so producers in the U.S. are able to join in from a timing perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The intention with this one, we won't be there during any harvest, most likely. We might catch a little bit of the earlier season corn. But with this one, it's just kind of what's not to love about Argentina. So there's wine country, beef, so we'll see some cattle operations and tend to see wine. It's known for world-class dove hunting. So it's a given that we need to do that. Also, we'll see some grain facilities, probably a very large crush facility near Rosario, the main port. All will be there. And then also I intend to include, I'm not sure if we'll start there or end there, but a trip to Iguazu Falls, which is there at the border of Paraguay, Argentina, and Paraná, Brazil. So
Awesome. That'll be amazing.
Cool place.
So before we wrap up, what else is ahead for No Bull in terms of the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, conference is a couple months down the road. Need to get that out of the way. Right after that, I still have some openings. So if you were interested in seeing cotton harvest in Mato Grosso, that one is August 1st through 9th. We will see oranges, coffee, sugarcane, ethanol. We'll see one of the largest independent beef feeding operations in Latin America. I believe they have 120,000 head per year capacity, something along those lines. And
Wow.
then we will venture to Mato Grosso and see cotton harvest, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I just came back from Brazil last week, actually, so
Did you?
it's a great place. Yeah, saw some coffee crops. Okay, well, look, we'll wrap it up there. It's been a great discussion. Thank you for your time and and again, just want to compliment you on how you've grown your business from scratch over the last few years. Best of luck with it going forward, and look forward to seeing some photos and hearing some news about all these tours.
Thank you.
All right, see ya. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the GSX podcast. You can find out more about GSX at greatsouthernx.com and follow us on X at gsxcommodities. You can also follow me, Henry Walsh, at H2Walsh. Until next time.